Yeah, I think effective engagement is already starting to happen. We do have the National Procurement website for Wales, Sell to Wales, which has around 10,000 members registered with it. And over the last couple of years, there's been somewhere in the region of £2 billion worth of opportunities notified to those members. That also, in turn, is being supported by CONTRACTSHOP and the project that I work on, Local Supplier Development Project, which is there to encourage networking and intertrading amongst local businesses and make the most of those opportunities that spin off either from Sell to Wales directly or the other spin-off opportunities that come from that. Well, firstly, I don't think the barriers are all from one side. I think there's a bottom-down, top-up aspect to these barriers. Firstly, the barriers from the public sector side are the obvious things like differing regulations from body to body. You know, different public sector bodies have different regulations, so that creates one problem. The other problem is the different constraints of the regulations, where you're pulled from one way to the other. And I think what you have is for example, all Wales purchasing agreements and aggregated spend agreements don't tend to go hand in hand with the SME community. On the other hand, the SMEs, I don't think, are engaging as well as they can because they don't see long-term, they don't look long-term, they don't have a strategic focus, and then that creates problems because they really can't see a long-term plan. Well, I think Sell to Wales and the project that I work on, Local Supplier Development, are working really well to help to remove some of the barriers to effective engagement. In addition to that, though, I think Local Supplier Development and Value Wales Procurement are working very hard to actually identify the barriers. Because removing them is one thing, but finding out what they are is another. So they're working hard to identify them, but they're also working fairly hard to find the solutions as well. Well, obviously there's a lot of new stuff going on, which it's very difficult to say whether it's been successful or not at this stage. But there is a very old established project called CONTRACTSHOP, which is the old CONTRACTSHOP, has been running for some years now, and that has worked very, very well in many areas of Wales. And for example, in Neath Talbot alone, help through CONTRACTSHOP has resulted in a number of local companies winning contracts to the value of around about £7.5 million over the last couple of years. Well, I can't really speak for the public sector, what their policies are on aggregated spend, but there is evidence to show that aggregated spend is becoming more of a tool used to sort of leverage on price, especially for products that can be commoditised, simple things like paper and tyres and those sorts of things. And yes, really it is a concern for us. Well, one of the main aims of the Local Supplier Development Project is to encourage businesses to work together, to collaborate on larger projects. And I've had in my role experience of working with a number of organisations from all levels at sort of initial stage of trying to form networks, right through to putting bids through for tenders. But at this stage, I think it's a little bit early to sort of judge the success of those. Also, in dealings with local procurement, public sector procurement organisations and officers, I've had requests from them to look at collaboration and see if we can encourage more businesses to collaborate to go for the big contracts. So I think that's a pretty good thing as well. Well, firstly, I think it's not necessarily a sector-specific problem. The issue of value for money and all UK tenders runs across all the sectors. And to a certain extent, I think that most businesses, most SME businesses, that is a semantic question for them, because they don't usually have the resources to compete regionally, let alone locally or nationally. Secondly, we have the issue of different interpretations of the phrase or the wording value for money, and you go to one organisation, they'll have one view, you go to another, they'll have another view. And I think that the public sector as well as the private sector need to be educated to understand that value for money probably includes other aspects such as socio-economic aspects and perhaps some of the environmental aspects. And I think maybe we've got to ask the question, if local projects or local spend occurred, would it help create more jobs? Would it help social inclusion? Would it have a positive impact on the environment? Those sorts of things. In the first instance, I think if organisations, especially the SME organisations, want to get involved and get engaged with public sector contracts, I think they've got to start taking a much more longer term and strategic view. Most of the small businesses that I've worked either with or for over the last few years just don't take that strategic viewpoint, and unless they do, I don't think they're really going to have the capability or the will to engage. Secondly, I think the ones that do want to get involved have to raise their game as well. They need to look at things like electronic procurement and doing e-business. They have to take sustainability and the environment seriously, and they have to be prepared to understand what is required by the public sector buyers. I think currently e-procurement is creating a fairly big barrier to most SMEs' engagement with public sector organisations, mainly because there's far too few small businesses that have the capability to trade electronically. Now, that is a bit of a problem, but there are an awful lot of initiatives and projects that are working at tackling that project, right from WAG at the top, right down to some of the small local projects that are being run.